Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most credible voice in true crime. Some incredible developments have been happening in true crime, not just in the Laurie Vallow, Daybell, Alex Cox case. It's difficult to say, on which of these individuals the case sort of centers, but let's say it's Laurie Vallow. Not just that case, the Madeleine McCann case is also exploding, making world headlines. And some cases are sort of drawing to a close, like Robert Durst and Letitia Stork. And others are sort of just beginning, like the Suzanne Morphew disappearance. Nobody knows where she is. No human remains have been found. She's still officially a missing persons case. In this episode, I want to talk a little bit about the recent developments in the Laurie Vallow case. Laurie's been charged with conspiracy, which is sort of related to the disposal of the human remains of her children. One child is adopted and the other is her child. It's sort of conspiracy surrounding the disposal of a dead body, which isn't I wouldn't say it's not a serious charge, but it's certainly not as serious as murder. And as Ashley Banfield said, it is spiraling gradually in that direction, that the spokes of the wheel are pointing towards something. But the prosecutors and cops are being very careful and taking their time and gradually piecing together their case. What is interesting is the conspiracy involves Chad Daybell, and it also involves her brother Alex Cox, her late brother who's no longer alive. In this episode, I want to really talk a little bit just about one particular question. And, in my Patreon channel, a couple of people have been sort of saying, did these people really believe their beliefs? Would they really have done what they did if they believed in God or in divine whatever? If they've got some kind of moral compass, how on earth could they do this? And my answer to that is absolutely. In the same way that I think debt and the affair was instrumental in the Chris Watts case, I think the beliefs and also the affair was instrumental in this particular case. It's very easy to get confused by the Laurie Vallow case because it is quite a complicated case with lots of permutations. I think it's important to sort of take it step by step. One of the reasons I've been a little bit hesitant to weigh into this case early on is firstly because you don't want to be talking about murder when it's not even officially a murder case. And of course, if you do start talking like that and the case goes to trial and they are acquitted, then guess who's going to come running after you, right? And this is a case where you've got a defendant who's also an author, and they are, authors are sensitive to what other authors say about them, kind of thing. So one really wants to wait for the charges to come through. The charge that implicates Laurie is obviously going to be added to Chad Daybell's charge list as well. Obviously, the bodies were found on his property, but there was nothing about a conspiracy, certainly not one involving Laurie until now. And so the question that I think is automatic in this case, and that's simply, I just want to address that question in this episode, is who is pulling the strings in terms of this trio? Who is the puppet master between these three people? Is it Laurie Vallow? Is it Chad Daybell? Was it Alex Cox? I don't know about you guys, but I don't think Alex Cox really features in the dynamic in the sense of him pulling strings. Number one, he's no longer alive. His autopsy shows he died of natural causes. I'm not sure if that is something we must accept. It doesn't mean that it didn't happen. Coincidences are possible, but it seems to me that it's more likely that the puppet master is either Laurie or Chad. That might seem like common sense, but just think about this. Alex is Laurie's brother, right? Laurie and Chad are husband and wife. So who's the odd one out in that dynamic? Well, obviously Alex, the brother. The brother's not married to Chad. He's sort of the odd one out. So obviously the power couple in this whole story, and the couple that has survived quite a few other couples, is Chad and Laurie. And I think one could make the argument that the puppet master is the couple. You know, it's not one person, it's two. You could make that argument. I'm not sure if I subscribe to that entirely. We still want to get more information. I still think the one of the most important dynamics in this case is how the cult psychology actually operates. So without knowing, it's almost like finding the blood type to a person. If you're going to give them a transfusion, you need to know the blood type. In order to understand this case, you sort of need to know the exact nature of their beliefs, how the permutations work. And I found there were a couple of lights going on when you read the probable cause affidavit for Chad Daybell, where you sort of see and this came via Melanie Gibb very late in the day, but it came via Melanie Gibb that, this whole belief in zombies, and that, you're doing a zombie a favor if you kill them, because you then let their soul go to where it needs to go. You basically send them off to heaven. And so when you're going to have a psychology like that, it's going to, obviously if you're brain addled enough, you're going to think that when you commit murder, you're actually doing people a favor. Of course, you're doing yourself a favor, and you're doing perhaps someone else who wants you to commit murder also a favor, but that is the psychology that sort of makes it all completely normal and completely fine. Now, before we get to the meat and potatoes of this puppet master question, I want to just compare it to something that is completely different in terms of it's not got to do with any particular religion. It's not got to do with Mormonism or Seventh-day Adventists or anything of a religious nature, but nevertheless does have to do with beliefs. And if we go to the Chris Watts case and you say, what were the beliefs that drove him to do what he did? Because one thing that people cannot believe, and it still beggars belief, is how the hell did he think he would get away with what he was doing? How did he think that people wouldn't find out? How did he think that Kissinger would sort of be like, oh, your family's gone, let's continue with our affair, let's even get married and have a kid. By the way, what happened to your wife? No, well, how did Watts have that kind of effed up belief that he could get away with murder? And the answer is he was sort of in a fairy tale where the fairy tale was that he wanted to happily ever after with Kissinger, and the blinding light of that fairy tale sort of overshadowed the ability to think about consequences and to think things through. I think there were other factors as well, like him being sleep deprived and so on, and very much in love and in lust and all that kind of thing. And there was a clock ticking, and so I think he made dumb decisions, although some of what he did was quite smart. Some of the ways that he hid the crime in plain sight, like in terms of a ordinary day at work, was actually quite smart. But ultimately the whole thing was dumb, right? But it was his beliefs in this fairy tale. I mean, he was pursuing a fairy tale with Kissinger that made him act in such a dumb way. Now, you take that kind of agnostic scenario, where you're believing in a personal fairy tale for yourself, and you take it into the Laurie Vallow case and you say, how on earth, or why on earth did these people do what they did? Why did Alex do what he did? Why did Laurie do what she did? Why did Chad do what he did? And the answer is they were all caught up in a fairy tale. The difference between Chris Watts in this case is that these are three separate people caught up in the same fairy tale. Now let me explain what I mean by that. In the Chris Watts case, the only person caught up in the Chris Watts fairy tale effectively was Chris Watts. I don't think if him and Kissinger had been together much longer, Kissinger would have stayed with him. I think Kissinger would have figured out he's a bit of an idiot. I mean, it was Chris Watts who decided to have a kid to repair his marriage when their debt situation was as dire as it was. That is idiotic. And I think it was just a matter of time before Kissinger sort of figured it out. You could also say Kissinger was duped by Watts because of her own feelings, perhaps, of longing and attraction, and the residue of her abusive previous relationship. But anyway, let's go back to Laurie Vallow. This is a situation where several people, and not just these three people, many other people as well, are caught up in the same religious fairy tale. And the religious fairy tale is in some ways far more powerful, almost larger than life. It's almost like the Marvel comic universe. It's this thing that spans the cosmos, and you can rise out of this canon, this cult canon, as almost like a superhero figure on Earth, and put on your mantle of cultish godliness and walk the earth like you own it, and snap your whip and whatever. And the question is, who is empowering this particular story? And to some extent the answer is each of these individuals. Each of these individuals is seeing and believing their own fairy tale, right? But one individual stands apart from all of them. And I don't mean that to say he stands apart like black and white, like head and shoulders. I'm just saying to some extent he stands apart. And what I mean by that is, if you look at Laurie and Melanie, they were both involved for a while in a podcast. So they already emerging kind of as leaders, as influencers, as people who are, I won't say they are puppet masters, but they are certainly pulling strings in terms of when you are sort of evangelizing somebody else. I mean that in a general sense. So if you any kind of televangelist or any kind of preacher or even a politician, any kind of leader, and you're addressing an audience, even what I'm doing now when I'm addressing you, I'm pulling strings. I'm trying to reach you. I'm trying to communicate with you. I'm trying to show you how certain ideas or thoughts may resonate, right? And you might say, oh, I think I agree with that or whatever. Now, it's far more important that you achieve that when you're a politician or a evangelist or someone like that, and I'll tell you why. Someone like me, this channel, there's no paid for advertising here. All I gain is a little bit of influence, and maybe I build my reputation a little bit, but the upside for me is not terribly significant. Whereas if you're a preacher or politician, you stand to gain followers that are going to change things, like institutions and political systems and communities, and it's going to have very real on the ground changes. That's if you're a politician. If you're an evangelist, well, then it might create a groundswell of interest as people convert, and they, followers then give their money, and I must say, with religious people, turning straw into gold is far more immediate than someone else. I mean, it's one of the quickest ways to make money is you just sell your fairy tale and you get money in exchange. You don't really have to do anything except tell a good story. I'm talking about through your voice, through your words. You can go to a church building and say something, and if your message resonates, you can make a heck of a lot of money just based on your charisma, right? Now, when we talk about that kind of thing, you get people who you might say have a relatively authentic message, or they believe in what's going on. I'm not saying any of these individuals didn't believe what was going on. It's hard to believe that the puppet master in this case didn't know that he was doing anything wrong. But I think it is possible that everyone in this case genuinely believed what they believed. I think it's definitely possible. I think it's likely that some people in this case genuinely believed that they were doing, even the silliest things that they were doing, even the most horrific things they were doing, I think they genuinely believed it was like divine. They're doing divine work. The question is, did the puppet master believe that? Did the puppet master believe his own dogma? That's hard to say. It's hard to say without having read all of Chad Daybell's books, without getting to know him a little bit better, without getting to know his background. But from what I have read and researched, he came from kind of quite a humble background as a grave digger, and in a weird way he hasn't come very far from there. He's still digging graves. The difference is he's now a god amongst men. And how did that happen? Well, isn't it because he shaped himself as one, and he also shaped Laurie as one? And so the interesting thing, and you heard it in the Dateline documentary, by the way, I'm analyzing that documentary on Patreon on the $2 tier, but the interesting thing in that documentary is it shows that Chad tells Laurie that she's a powerful woman, and there's really your answer. So Chad's the guy who is mainlining divine insight and divine power in a way. He's sort of the messenger, but he's also some kind of superhero figure with lots of other personalities in him. It's almost like someone with a split personality, except he's choosing these identities, and of course they're all awesome. When you've lived past lives, you are either Mother Teresa or John F. Kennedy, but you'll never be some sort of anonymous idiot, some sort of unknown beggar, or some horrible person like one of Hitler's henchmen or something like that. You're always going to be some kind of heroic figure, and isn't that convenient? So I do think it makes sense to isolate Chad as the puppet master in terms of the trio. But I also think you've got to, it's not as black and white as that, because the puppets aren't like, they are people that subscribe to the beliefs that they believed, I think, before Chad came along. So the beliefs were already there. I'm talking about the somewhat idiosyncratic beliefs that Laurie and her brother had to begin with. Chad then entered that schema, and he kind of empowered those beliefs with sort of practical things and enhanced them as well with his own with his own theology and his own interpretations. And the thing that sort of stands completely apart between these three people is that one of them is the writer of books about religion. And if you look at all of these people almost as a congregation, who is the leader of that congregation? Who is the leader of the cult? And isn't the answer to that question obvious? And so I think the interesting question that's going to emerge out of this trial and out of this case is, I'm quite sure at this point, not knowing a hell of a lot about it, but I'm quite sure that some of the other people in this case sincerely believed certain things and were naive, and others were more strategic and were using people's naivete and being gullible and using that to gain power for themselves and to gain power over others. And I think at a certain point, when you're gaining power over other people, it kind of goes to your head, and you start to cross certain boundaries, and the power you're gaining over people then becomes a sense of being immortal, and also a sense of the mortality of others, the weakness and vulnerabilities of others, which you then take advantage of even more, if that makes sense. So what is going to be interesting and probably quite difficult to do in this case is, it's one thing to say what I've been saying in this episode. It's another thing to feel it, to feel the sense of being consumed by these really sort of intoxicating, giddy beliefs, to really have the sense that, wow, the world isn't the way we see it. The world has been pulled over our eyes. Where suddenly you're in the matrix, and suddenly everything is different. Suddenly all the things that are going on are completely different, and then you want to give up your life, give up your name, give up your family, and become someone else in a sort of a newly created world. Created by who? Well, by the puppet master. I'm not going to take things further than that. I just wanted to respond to the latest charges. Later today will be another brief episode in hashtag 2 years ago today CW. That's for Chris Watts. If you're interested in the Chris Watts case, please use that hashtag on Twitter and on Facebook, especially over the next 2 months, July running up to the middle of August. I can also tell you that the second book in the 9-part Two-Face series, Beneath the Oil, is now available in paperback. The first book is also available in paperback. There are a couple of other books available in paperback as well, but you can just sort of have a look at those. Silver Fox, Wedded Husband, Wedded Wife is available in paperback as well. So yeah, quite a few books if you don't use Kindle and you don't want to listen to the books. Obviously, if you want to listen to the books, you can go to Patreon. They're available on the $5 tier and the $10 tier. Right now I'm working on a book, Beach of Light, which is dealing with the current circus of information around the latest prime suspect in the Madeleine McCann case, in inverted commas. And so what I'm really doing is I'm analyzing the media narrative and just showing how the narrative is contradicting itself, how it's invalidating itself, how when you tie the current media narrative to what has gone before, in other words, you don't just pick up the fragment and say, oh wow, this is amazing, but you tie it to the rest of the McCann story. We're trying to see beyond the trees to the woods, and what is being presented to us. What are we being blinded to? What are we not seeing? And that is what Beach of Light's all about. So I'm currently working on that book and trying to stay on top of the Laurie Vallow case. I think it is gradually developing momentum now, and obviously when it goes to trial, then it'll be really interesting to cover that. But if you're interested in my coverage of it, ongoing coverage of the Vallow case, please subscribe to the channel, like, share, leave a comment. And I'll see you guys next time.